I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. Welcome to the 36th episode of the Inside Track podcast. Since launching this podcast back in February 2020, I have been amazed by the generosity and openness of my guests, who have willingly shared their experiences, both good and bad, all with the intention of helping and supporting others. As we moved into autumn last year, I launched the Transformation Leaders Hub, a true community of people operating in project, program, change and transformation. Again, the focus is on helping and supporting others to build successful careers. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do so and take us up on our trial membership and experience what TLH can offer you firsthand. One person that took me up on this offer joins me today, Jonathan Rowbotham. He is an experienced program and transformation director operating primarily in the financial services sector. Being highly regulated and under increased scrutiny in recent years, I find that talking to people from within the industry often throws up some interesting insights that can be applied to others. I'm sure that you'll find this today, so without further delay, let me introduce you to Jonathan. Thanks, Jonathan. It's great to welcome you to the Inside Track podcast today. Thanks for agreeing to join us. You've got significant change and transformation experience, and I'm sure today's show will be very insightful for many. But let's start, as we always do, just by providing the listeners with a brief summary of your career to date and how you transitioned into the world of change and transformation in the first place.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Tony, for the opportunity. I've been in the primarily financial services industry for about 30 years. I did an MBA at Cranfield and moved into one of the IT organizations in Deutsche Bank, and then after that in HSBC, beginning as a COO business manager, who also had responsibility for some internal change projects. And then that evolved into more major transformation programs at HSBC involving design implementation of target operating models and the achievement of various strategic goals. Since leaving HSBC in 2017, I've worked as an independent consultant with a mixture of organizations. I work with a small software company, helping them to transform themselves from really a lifestyle business to an organization that was not only growing significantly in terms of revenue, but was also being run more professionally and therefore would be more attractive to external investment. Mm-hmm. And also I've done some public sector programs, and also most recently I've helped put in place a remediation program for a largish insurance company who had a need to improve their IT services that were being provided by a third-party managed service provider in India.
Right. Okay. I'm sure we'll cover some of the challenges and issues that have arisen out of some of those programs during today's discussion. But before we get into the detail, the first question that we always ask, because there's so many variations of the theme, really, but how do you define transformation?
Well, I remember one of the first things at Cranfield was the distinction between incremental change and transformational change. And I guess therefore transformational change is obviously large by definition. It fundamentally involves a change in how an organization operates, and also the culture that supports that organization. And generally transformational change, I think, in response or in anticipation to a major change in that organization's environment or its technology. So it's it's looking to change the way or respond to how customers interact with them, and also how their employees operate and interact with those customers.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And one of the things that you bring out in a lot of your sort of profiles, online profiles, is that you have a focus on driving change that delivers cost savings and efficiencies. That, you know, and I think one of your profiles, it mentions that you've averaged $50 million cost reductions in IT spend throughout your career. Can you tell me more about that? Because I think that's quite an interesting area of focus.
Yeah, I think, well, generally within financial services, certainly since about 2000 onwards, cost reduction has always been an ongoing theme within the banks, and particularly within the IT organizations within those banks. As part of that, a cost reduction exercise has to be supported by a clear program to achieve that. But ultimately, it needs to be part of, as I said, a wider transformational program. So it's not just about cost reduction, but that often is maybe one of the key areas of focus based on a new operator model. In HSBC in 2010, we kicked off a transformation program across their IT and operations organization. Was putting in place a new operating model that moved from a very regional, so 5 regions, to a global organization providing global services to global businesses. Now that organization, that part of HSBC, had 9,000 people in it, and it had a $2.5 billion spend. So at one extreme, you have something like that, where we were looking to reduce that spend by around 10-15% over 3 years. So you're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars at that point. And at the other end of the scale, you might just have a cost reduction program focusing on some of the other underlying cost drivers within the organization.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've done, throughout my career, I've done a number of transformations that have been focused upon taking cost out of a process or out of a structure. And when we looked at where the opportunities lay, a lot of it was around simplification. Is probably the easiest way of describing it. It was about taking out inefficient processes, or processes that had been built on top of processes, or technologies that had been built on top of technologies, and just going back, almost stepping back and going down to a much more simpler process, or a simpler platform. Is that what you've experienced within the banking world as well?
Yes, there's sort of been a number of different areas that are sort of the go-to areas when cost reductions looked at. We did a couple of exercises in HSBC around management structure, and that was based on the premise of having a sort of 8x10 organization, where each manager would have an average of 10 reports, and there would be no more than 8 layers of management from the CEO downwards. You'd have, like you say, in large organizations, particularly organizations maybe which have been are a result of a number of have grown through a number of acquisitions. You may have a lot of duplicate processes being provided from a number of different locations. So again, that's removing the duplication in terms of multiple processes, getting a consistency, and, like you say, simplifying those processes, and providing those processes maybe from a single location, but at least providing them based on a consistent service offering. So you're removing out the inefficiencies there. And then you've got, you say, technologies, and a lot of legacy technology still existing within an organization, looking again to introduce a standardization for those technologies, and removing a lot of the again, multiple versions of different bits of software. And obviously more recently, or say more recently, over the last 5-6 years, the move to things like cloud computing, so removing cost in terms of on-premise data centers, on-premise hardware, and moving that into the cloud, which obviously gives you flexibility as well in terms of your technology, your usage of that technology, and also takes away a lot of their fixed costs from you as an organization.
Just looking back on those programs that you've been responsible for and leading, what are the essential elements, do you think, a program needs to have to be successful?
Well, actually, last week I did a poll on LinkedIn because ahead of this podcast, I guess I just wanted to see what other people thought in terms of what makes a successful transformation program. And the majority of people, I think that 43% of people said, well, actually the question was what often was the cause of an unsuccessful transformation program, and 43% of people said the lack of executive buy-in. And I think that is true. Clear executive buy-in and accountability. Obviously, it has to have other stakeholder buy-in, and particularly employees. So, from an executive point of view, you need to be clear of why the transformation is being undertaken. How does it fit into the vision for your organization or your part of the organization? And that has to be clearly communicated to people so they can see the traceability back from the transformation initiatives that have been started to what that overall strategy and vision is. When we kicked off this transformation program at HSBC in 2010, we started off being very clear about what the vision was. And to achieve that vision, there needed to be a set of strategic goals that needed to be achieved. And then aligned to those strategic goals were a number of initiatives to deliver that. And they needed that traceability. So everything had to trace back. And so it was clear to anyone, why are we undertaking this initiative? It's very clear how it contributes to the one or more of those strategic goals, and therefore achieving it helps to achieve the vision. And you have to lay that out, and an executive management, senior management need to be very clear about that, because the people doing the implementation, supporting those initiatives, need to understand why it's important, and being able to present that clearly is very important. And as I said, you need to have accountability. So what we did was we aligned to each of the goals. We aligned a sponsor from the management team, from the executive committee, to each of those goals. You need to have dedicated resources and a commitment of resources and budget to successful transformation. And the people who own those resources also have a responsibility to make sure that the day-to-day operations are run successfully. You have to get that balance right, because you want to make sure you have ultimately responsibility to make sure that your day-to-day operations are running effectively, but equally you're trying to change and transform, and that takes away resource, particularly some of your better resources and better people away from the day-to-day operations. So there's naturally a resistance to that. So the people who own those resources, i.e. the senior managers of the various functions, you need to make sure that they're signed up to that transformation. And the way we did it was to put each of them as a sponsor against one of our strategic goals. And therefore, how they measured their performance wasn't just against day-to-day operations, but it was also against how their strategic goal was delivered.
I think that's the key, isn't it? And all too often, those KPIs or performance, the performance targets that have been set don't get adapted to reflect the the change that's being driven in. So you've immediately got this conflict at sometimes at senior level, whereby they're being measured on old style KPIs while still being driven to deliver a transformation, and the two are not aligned. But just want to pick you up, and again, just on your experience with the program that we've just been talking about within HSBC. When you had the big program and you've got the strategic alignment, and then you broke it down into its component parts, and you brought one of the senior team in as a sponsor of individual elements. What did you do, and how did you go about ensuring that they were still aligned to that end vision?
Well, my role was overall, I was a transformation director. I had a small group of project managers who, so essentially each of those goals was like a program with a number of projects below it. So I had a small team of project managers who would be assigned to one or more of those goals to oversee them as sort of programs. At the same time, there were resources, I said, and some of those would be project resources provided from within the functions to help support some of the individual projects. So we had a central to governance and oversight. So we ran it as a program. It's kind of a collective thing to make sure that, you know, collectively there was accountability, but equally, because we'd started with a vision and a set of strategic goals that the executive team had agreed, obviously the achievement of those goals was, you know, a collective responsibility. So it's making sure it's visibility around the progress. And all the time, you know, like with any transformation, with anything where you're doing something that is in some ways discretionary, so it's not day-to-day operations as such, you'd always ask the question, are we doing something? If we're doing something, is that aligned to our overall strategy and vision?
Yeah. And just kept bringing it back to that.
Yeah, and if someone had gone off, and maybe for very good reasons, gone off and started an initiative because they felt that, you know, this is something that needed to be done, then if that wasn't the view of the overall executive team, then you know that obviously would have to be raised because that was using resources that could be better used elsewhere. So it's always having, again, that accountability, that traceability, and that collective responsibility.
No, I agree. One of the most successful programs I ever got involved in was within a bank, interestingly enough. And at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning, we knew where all the executive team were because they were in a program board. And this was a massive transformation program with multiple individual programs, effectively breaking the bank into its component parts and rebuilding it. And every Thursday morning from 10 till 2, all the executive team would just have presentation after presentation, updates after updates, and making sure that all of the different elements were on track. And absolutely, right up front was, this is the vision, this is what we're trying to achieve, and every question that was asked was around, are we moving further away or closer to that end vision? And it was so streamlined, and you know, vastly a vast overall program, but so streamlined in its governance and its approach. And you knew where you stood as a program manager within one of the activities. You knew exactly where you stood because you knew when you got the approval, you had the approval of the whole executive team, and you could move on. And there was no politics that tends to get involved in some programs that I've been involved with subsequently. So we talked about the essential elements, one being alignment of strategy and executive buy-in. What are your other must-haves?
You've got to have some dedicated resourcing and commitments of time and bandwidth to make it succeed. And you know, whether that's commitment from, as I said, the senior management, the executives around their time. and ultimately for it to be successful, it's got to be sustainable. So again, you can go through all of these transformations, but if at the end of it it's not sustainable, then you're just going to revert back to some of the processes. And people do, most people do adapt, but there's also a tendency for people to revert back to what they did before. So it needs to be sustainable, and that's really when we talk about transformation, you talk about it's got to have there's got to be an underlying change in your operating model, your way of working, but also a change in your culture, how people do things, how people interact. So there's a lot of emphasis on agile transformation, which is a change in the mindset, the way people collaborate, the way people interact. And then on digital transformation, where within your organization, digital transformation impacts the way that the employees within your organization work, the tools, the technologies they have to undertake their roles. So it has to be sustainable from that point of view to make, to really shift how people think and how people operate.
Yeah, it's interesting. You touched on something earlier around sort of the multi-year transformation programs, and when as you say, when you are doing a large transformation, they will naturally be multi-year, and you absolutely buy into the concept of breaking them down into the component parts and getting such settings on the way to build that momentum. Change is ever present, and people can become tired of it, and because it is just constant. So what type of things do you do to build that momentum and keep people engaged?
Any change, any transformation program has a very strong communication strategy around it. So you need to be very clear at the start why the transformation is taking place. How does it align to the overall vision and strategy for the organization? You have to be very clear what it means to the functions within the organization. You have to be very clear what it means to the individuals within the organization, because ultimately that's what people are interested in. How does it affect me?
Absolutely,
is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Tell me now. And then
that's the number one question, isn't it? It's always the number one question.
Ultimately, that's what people want to know. So, and then you have to. So, having gone through that, people will then show an interest in supporting the change. They'll want to know where they can get involved, how they can support it, and I think you need to have that continual communication all the way through. And again, it comes from the senior executives downwards. And obviously, as part of the ongoing program, you need to provide regular updates in terms of how it's progressing, and that includes, like you say, highlighting the wins and highlighting some of the people who have contributed to those wins, so you celebrate success. And again, it depends on how big the organization is. So we talk about, I spoke about a 3-year transformation program. Well, obviously, for an organization, a large international bank, 3 years, it seems a long time, but actually that's, the sort of scale that you're changing, that's not unreasonable. If you're in a smaller organization, an SME, then you probably don't want to have a change program going on for more than about 12 months, because people do need you need to be continually evolving. And like you said, a small organization, people will get dangerous. They will start to get tired of the ongoing change. So it's very much about communication, getting people bought into it, getting people supporting it, getting people wanting to contribute to the success, and keeping people informed all the time, keeping people informed about how things are progressing.
We're talking about this on an earlier podcast around just being honest in that communication, because as we just said, the number one question is, what does it mean for me? Whether they overtly come out and ask that question, they're certainly thinking it. the key is just to be honest. And if you know, tell them. And if you don't know, tell them that you don't know. But this is what you're doing to work out what the answer will be. And people will accept that. They don't accept a void when you're trying, because they'll think you're holding stuff back from them, and then they'll naturally start to make their own stories up, and it'll probably be worse than reality. So just to keep being honest and open with people is a key theme, I think.
Yeah, like you said, to be open and honest. Tell people what you can tell them. If you can't, either because you don't know or because you can't, because quite often the change involves consultation with outside bodies. If you're in a bank in particular, then tell them what you can tell them at the moment. Tell them what you'll be able to tell them when in the future.
Absolutely.
And be, and this is where we sort of get into the whole aspect of emotional intelligence now. Be understanding of people's feelings and how this is going to impact them. I remember years ago, and by that I mean sort of around 2001, there was a major cost cutting exercise within IT at the time. And I remember going to a town hall, which was really where the first communication was about the changes, the fact that 10% or something of the workforce was having to be cut back. So this was the moment when the CIO had a chance to present what was going to happen and what could be told at the time. But also in a way that was sympathetic to the audience, who, by definition, 1 in 10 of them was going to have a very negative impact on them. And just to say, it wasn't the most impressive speech given. I think, apart from finding out that there was going to be 10% reduction in roles, we also seemed to find out that one of the primary motives was to ensure that CIO's bonus was as high as possible.
Right.
That seemed to be his particular. That seemed to be his particular incentive for making sure it was a success. Was his individual bonus. That's the way it was portrayed, and people walked out of the room thinking, "Well, he's all right, but but we're not."
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is all about positioning, and the safest way, in my experience, is to, as you said right at the start, just keep coming back to that vision. Why we're doing what we're doing, how does that align to the overall corporate vision and strategy, and then keep coming back to that all the way through in all your communication, because people, it will have an impact on people positively and negatively. But at least if they can understand the reasons why things are happening, they get the context, and they can, they might not like it, but they can accept it. So with that, thank you very much for your time. We occasionally get questions. Are you happy if I collate them? Will you be happy to respond?
Yes, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, thanks a lot, Jonathan.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you for the opportunity.
Once again, Jonathan, thank you very much for your time. If you haven't checked it out already and you operate in change and transformation, why not? The whole focus of TLH is to help its members to stand out, to provide a platform on which to build their reputation, expand their network, and ultimately to attract new career opportunities to them. We have a core objective to be instrumental in delivering $100 million worth of opportunity into the membership within the next 10 years. We have recently launched the TLH mentoring program, so if you think you'd benefit from working alongside an experienced transformation leader, please do get in touch. Also, please do subscribe to the podcast and leave us your feedback. I will always respond to you, and I know my guests would be delighted to explore things further with you. See you in a couple of weeks.